Hello everyone, it's Lunar from LunarSpotlight Media. It is February 24th, 2019, and it's been a little while since I've done an update, so let's get into another one of those, shall we? So let's start with something a little fun. This right here on my screen is a stack of Raspberry Pi 0Ws. It is a very small Raspberry Pi board, as you can tell, a quarter for scale there, and there are 3 of them stacked on top of one another. The idea here was to look into how cluster computers work, or how cluster systems work in computing. And I've learned a few things over the last week and a half, 2 weeks. First of all, these Pis, for what I was trying to do with them, were not running the right architecture, so I had to get another Raspberry Pi. And then, of course, I had one before all of that, which was actually kind of a similar architecture. It's so if you don't know, Raspberry Pis run on an ARM architecture, very similar to many mobile phones out there, run on ARM chips. That is ARM, as opposed to, say, your x86 or 64 processors like Intel or AMD. The programs that are built for running on these processors have to be compiled for the architecture that they're running on. So this was running on ARM version 6, and I needed something that was a little beefier than that, so I went out, got another one, and actually now it looks something, well, not like that. It looks kind of like, yeah, this one. So this is what I'm currently running. The bottom one here is my original Raspberry Pi I've had for a number of years. We have the 3 boards stacked on top of one another still. On the top one there is a Raspberry Pi 3B. That runs up to ARM version 8, and I needed that in order to install some things that would be essentially serve as the core of the cluster, the manager, if you will. So yeah, over here is actually a live look at what's running on this stack right now. This one for some reason has gone offline, but the other 4 are fine. I've kind of named them after planets or celestial objects in the solar system. So lunar Sol is the sun, or the center, the manager of the cluster. And we have Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. And I have basically anything that won't run on any of the others is running on Sol. You can see kind of why I needed it, because most of this stuff really, except for Redis, because it's running on these, needed to run on that higher architecture. So there you have that. Then you have the other 3 that are also running on Redis. Redis is a in-memory database system, and I've kind of looked briefly into that, but what was really interesting was some of the other things that you could do with this. So we have a more detailed look of sort of our nodes here and our managers. That's why I guess the nodes are called workers in this view. We have different apps that you can put on them. This is running on a Docker swarm, in case you're curious. And then this is Portainer, which is running in a Docker container. You can see right over here, that's where it's running. And then you have a number of things that are running. That's kind of what these are. Redis, which is global, so it wants to put itself at least one on every node that you have, plus the manager. Anyway, that's all fine and good, but like, what does most of this do? Well, to be honest, much of this is just running the core of the system, that is OpenFaaS, this thing, which is kind of strange, because like, at first glance, it doesn't really look like it does much. You can make this do quite a bit. I haven't really sort of worked around with it all that much, but let's do SSL TLS cert info. So we'll deploy this. And the other interesting thing about this is that this cluster right now is also running a metrics tracking system called Grafana. It works with a module called Prometheus on OpenFaaS. That's part of it. You can actually see Prometheus right over somewhere. Yeah, the top one there. And that does a bunch of like tracking and stuff. So since I've spun this up, we can actually see in replica scaling that we've got one something here. And this updates every 5 seconds, as you can see in the upper right corner there. If I want to click into cert info, this is really simple. So like, what we would do is we would type in, say, consultradio.net, and the point of this is to, if we invoke it, it'll give us information on the SSL cert. So we'll invoke it. It tells us the host IP, the port that it was retrieved from. We can see that total invocations has gone up by 1, which is kind of cool, as you can see by this chart here. And yeah, the gateway service count would go up if I invoke this a bunch of times, maybe. We can do google.com. Just do that. Google has a lot of different TLDs, like a lot of different sort of alt names covered in there, and invocations has gone up quite a bit, as you'll notice. Gateway service count might go up, and the cool thing with this whole system is that if load increases, it'll automatically start to put, like, we see cert info is actually a new module here that's running on Mercury, but it's accessible through the same thing. Like, it all is accessible through the same IP address, which is really cool. That's part of what makes the cluster really neat to work with, because you can scale things up as demand increases. This is just an exercise in learning about clustering and cluster servers and how they would work potentially in this scenario. OpenFaaS and Kubernetes is another one that's out there, but I mean, there's many of them out there. Docker Swarm isn't the only thing that you can run this type of thing on. Anyway, the way that this is relevant to other things beyond just sort of having fun with it is, well, this Grafana thing looked kind of cool, and so I was curious to see if I could get something that was a little more practical, a little more usable. And so this is an actual live updating panel for Gensoki Radio. True to life here. Actual current connections, registered users, the number of ratings, and this is today so far, along with the average rating. And you'll see that it updates every 10 seconds, so this will fluctuate and things might move and numbers might change. So it's all pretty cool. Station connections over the last, today so far. You can change the range and it'll change a bunch of the graphs and things that'll appear. Rating average, obviously your top rating is 5, so we have that, but then I have sort of this line here set at, I think it was set at 3. It might be 3.5 again, actually. You have your daily rating totals. You can set exactly, like, regardless of what you have this set at, how far back the history goes. So I have this set for the last 3 months for daily rating totals, and then this table down here is just sort of an actual look at the latest ratings that have come in. So you'll see that, we can see the user that rated them, the song they rated, what they rated the song. And this isn't really public information, but it's a good example. We can see other things. If they rated it a 3, it's going to turn up orange. If it's rated a 2 or below, it's going to turn up red. And yeah, I mean, I'm in there somewhere too, right there. So yeah, this is pretty cool. It's even cooler when you adjust this. Like, for example, this heat map doesn't really look like much because it's just looking at today, but let's look at like this week. Like I said, I didn't change it. It's Sunday. Technically, that might just be today. Let's look at the last 7 days. So this gets a little more interesting. So you can kind of see like the trending. There's an obvious peak during the day. There's an obvious sort of trough during each day. It's very like cyclical. Let's look at this month so far. Again, you can see just sort of a trend, and you can pull more information from this. You can see the ratings there. This isn't going to change because it's set to the last 3 months sort of statically. And then this thing down here actually has a bunch of different pages that we can look at. We can go all the way like back to, this would be on the 17th. You can see, maybe there's a user out there that just sort of habitually ranks things low, like username for whatever reason wanted to rate all these things low, so those are a bunch of 1s and 2s, and that could be useful information. Maybe we have a user at some point in the future that just has a bad day or thinks all the music on our station sucks and wants to mess around with the ratings because that's a function that we make available for people to use. So that could be useful to say, well, in the next top 100 list, maybe we need to filter out a particular user who has been rating songs nothing but 2s and 1s. Like, are they giving any real feedback that we can use? This login activity heat map is another useful thing because we can take a look at this and see how many times per bucket technically this is what that is, someone has logged in. And so if you have a really short time span, say this week, well, let's say the last couple days here, we can see that most people are going to only be logging in once, but there's some people, individual user accounts that log in twice per, in this case it's, take a look at this, 11:36 to 13:12. That's twice in a roughly 2 hour span, which is a little strange. But we can see like the hotter colors are white and the cooler colors are purple in a good old GR theme. And so we can see like the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s. Typically you just see like people logging in once and then it sort of holds. Otherwise, if they're using a different browser, if they switch to their phone from their computer or something, it's really just kind of trying to understand better how people are using the system and if there's anything that we can do to improve the user experience. Station connection history is also kind of relevant, obviously, because we want to see that at the very least that we're not shrinking. I can look at the last couple years here. This actually goes quite far back. Login activity will break, but the rest of this should give me something. Oh, that's right. So this is interesting. In August 2017, we ended up getting a massive number of connections from a group of Russian IPs. This was effectively a DDoS, but it was done in such a way that it bypassed our DDoS mitigation software that our hosting provider has for us. Anyway, so let's cut back to 1 year here. Well, this is interesting. Why is this up and then it goes down? That's a little unusual. Anyway, something you can look into. Don't know why the state. Okay, there we go. Again, we have another really high one here. This looks like, well, it's over 300, which is weird because their station cap is 200, so we should never go above that. The other one was 85,000, which again, don't really know how that's possible, but that's what the reading ended up being. So yeah, but we can see that, like, if we get rid of the outliers, say we want to edit this and we want to say the axes has a maximum of 200 because that's the highest number of listeners we can actually have for this. Well, and then we can sort of adjust that a little bit and see, well, the average is very obviously like sort of around 50, and we aren't really growing, we aren't really shrinking, we're just really, really steady. And that's honestly how it's been for the past, few years probably. So it's interesting to just sort of look at this and confirm stuff like that. Anyway, so going back to this week so far, current connections isn't affected by any of this because it's based only on, and this is based on this table here, which is interesting. This is also the list where I get, when I read off countries and listeners, this is exactly what I'm reading. So that's kind of fun. But anyway, so let's take a look at, say, the last hour. There's been 11 ratings in the last hour. I'll listen to this song. Now, even though I've rated this song before, if I submit another rating today, it'll still count towards the daily ranking or daily total. So I'll hit great. And that 11 will go up to 12, and it increases the average rating just a little bit. And it moves this line just a little bit, and it increases this counter. Actually, it's probably the one that it hasn't technically counted yet. Yeah, all that stuff gets updated, plus you can see my ranking right there on the top of the table. So, hey. So yeah, that's basically that. Grafana is a really cool tool that I ended up sort of discovering through this cluster process. All right, so there's a few other things I want to cover before we get to the end of this video. Kind of moving away from the cluster stuff. One of the things that we have been reaching out to the community about has been the artist search. We're looking for artwork in 2019. It's something we do every year. Every year since 2012, we've had a handout that has been designed by an artist, typically a guest artist. I mean, technically 1 year. Nano actually made something that we ended up printing out. And so we did that again this year, and the due date was on the 19th, so that was about 5 days ago. And last night I went through our results with Nano and Zara, and the unfortunate thing is we only got one result. This is actually, I think, the lowest number of results we've ever received, even since the beginning in 2012. And so it wasn't really a matter of determining which of the entries was going to be selected, but more so, is what we got something that we want to print? And it wasn't a really bad design. It was something that we had to be critical about because it was the only thing that we had to reference. And I mean, we're always kind of critical of our entries because we end up spending something like $120, $130 on just printing handouts every year. That's to give out to people for free. It's just some cool thing to do. It's cool fan artwork. So we determined for the first time since we started doing it that we will not be printing any new handouts this year. Instead, what we'll be doing is we'll take the handouts that we've still got from the last couple of years. Because we've had a distinct lack of volunteers, we still have a ton of handouts on hand. So we're going to bring those to places like Boston and maybe send some out to SoccerCon and anywhere else that our staff ends up going this year, anywhere that we end up going this year as well. It's kind of redundant, but yeah. And of course, if there's any volunteers out there who are going to conventions either elsewhere in the States or elsewhere in the world, historically, a couple of years ago or a few years ago, we have ended up doing is sending a bunch of stuff out to people just to have out there. And it typically, it helps out just a little bit. Plus, it's a fun way to get someone else's artwork out there. And of course, the artist knows and they're credited and all that stuff. So it's sort of a win-win for everyone, but it is just kind of going back to reality, something that we do typically spend money on. And this year, we're just not feeling like what we got is worth printing $130 worth of handouts. So them's the facts. Now, for those of you who are sort of observant, one of our tiers on Patreon is to give people the latest handout. Instead, and of course, if you don't feel this is really worth it, then do let me know. But instead, what I'll be doing is recently I called out about a new thing that we want to do that is stickers. It's honestly just a small thing. It's one of the things that people have sort of reached out to us and said, hey, I'm interested in supporting the station, but I don't want to pay like the $8 or the $13 or whatever it is in shipping to get it from the US to whatever other country they're in. Is there anything that you can do that would be a lot cheaper? And so like stickers is one of those things where we can put it in a standard mailing envelope, slap a global, an airmail stamp or whatever on it to get it out to people. And that's a lot cheaper to do it that way, while still giving people the opportunity to support in some way that's tangible and stuff like that. So stickers is one of those things that we're very likely going to be doing. And when we get those printed out, I will send some out to all the people that would have otherwise got handouts. This would typically be one of those things that we end up, like if you're at the tier where you get whatever new product GR comes up with, you get one of those for free. Typically, this would go to them pretty exclusively, but stickers are one of those things I think I will help make up for the lack of a new handout this year. If you don't feel that way, do get back to me and let me know, and maybe we can figure out something else. Otherwise, I'm just going to assume that people are pretty content with that compromise, and we'll kind of move on from there. Looking at the poll, it looks like people would be fine with either the 2.5 or the 3-inch diameter stickers. So I guess it's up to me. Tune in next time to find out which one we picked. Or look in your mailbox. It might be there instead. All right. So other than that, we covered GR, handouts, anything new at LSM. Oh, so recently with the Creative Cloud thing, one of the tiers, if you look back, I think it's like at $80 or whatever. If we cross that number, we would end up getting some software and some things to help support sort of the progression, the continuation of producing content for GR and stuff like that. Recently, Adobe had a sale, and that allowed us to go from having just Premiere and Photoshop to having everything, because it is effectively the same price. This is true for a year, and unfortunately, if I so After Effects was one of those things, not our latest top 100 video, which is out right now as well, but the first one we did back for the 2017 list, we ended up using a free trial of After Effects. And so now that we have After Effects, and also our 2018 video did not use After Effects, it used only Premiere Pro. Now that we have it, it's great, but I can't open it because when I try to open it, it complains about Unicode characters. Yes, where else have I heard about that sort of issue before? Our radio station actually tends to choke on certain characters, and so I get to figure that one out. Honestly, there are some other issues with the computer that I've been experiencing, so I need to go ahead and start working on a refresh that is clearing out the amount of stuff that I have on this computer, moving it to our server, doing a reformat. And so the first step is to actually not necessarily look at what files and things I have on this computer, because I have to have somewhere to move them to. And so we look to the vault, which is also quite full at this point. Now, I've been running this for the last 3 hours. This tells me where files are, what's taking up a lot of space. It's only about 52% of the way through. It's using 145 megabytes of memory locally. WinterStat's a great program, but there is an absolutely massive amount of files to deal with here. So once this comes up with an analysis of where I can start focusing my attention, converting some files, and maybe just getting rid of some things to make room for the files on my local disk, then we'll kind of go from there, do the format, get that stuff out. Honestly, I wanted to, I was pretty excited about having After Effects, and I wanted to make something to start kind of putting a splash screen at the beginning and the end, and get some actual formatting. So I hope to have that in before too long. It's a bit of a bear because, as you'll see, I have something like 700 gigabytes to clear, and I only have about free space 887 gigabytes on the Vault. So not great, but that kind of falls in with the data project, data archive project that's been going on for, it's a ongoing thing. I don't really know if it's within the category of this campaign, but that is something worth mentioning because it does take some of my time, and school takes some of my time as well, and classes and things, which of course are another thing that is sort of responsible for being able to put out just a little less content. There's a couple important things. One is behind the scenes clips. I am aware that they are lacking, they're behind. And so I'm actually going to print out a thing and go through everything on the campaign, see what's missing, get clips for everything that's missing. And so you might notice that within the next week or two or whatever, I don't really want to dump a bunch of things on the page all at once, but you may notice more frequently that we're posting more behind the scenes material for the shows and things. So that's something that you have to look forward to, I suppose. And the other thing is probably, so Project Spectrum, again, we kind of mentioned that it was shelved. I've been looking into languages to use, or a language that I can use to recode the existing Spectrum code, because it's coded in PHP, which is fine. It's what I knew, and it works with it works as it is, but it's also not the most efficient. So I'm looking into perhaps Python, which I actually kind of learned relatively recently would take possibly more power, possibly be slower or about the same as PHP. So I'm a little on the fence about that. Or coincidentally, one of the classes that I'm learning object-oriented programming in uses Java. And Java tends to be, if you look on sort of recommendation sites and things, that Java tends to use less energy and be faster, more efficient and stuff. So I might end up using that as well. For those who are saying, why aren't you using C? I'm not using C because I need a package that's able to work with image data and convert that into a matrix of sorts so that I can actually do some of the algorithmic like analysis that we end up doing on the music to do what Spectrum does. And in order to get all that done, I was going to look at running that Java program or that Python program or whatever on OpenFAS. And that's where the PyCluster comes in. So now that we've gone full circle, thanks for listening to this update. I'm Lunar, and I'll talk to you in the next one.